Great. Thank you, Angela. Hi, my name is Matt Casey. I'm the Associate Director of Graduate Career Services at Tufts. And welcome to our resume, CV, and cover letter presentation. It's our hope today to give a primer on best practices, some tools and resources that can be helpful to navigate creating documents that are thoughtful, marketable, and ideally put you in the best position to secure interviews and land jobs. So I think it's really important to cover the fact, and this is for everybody, and probably one of the most important slides in this presentation, is to remember that career planning is a process, and wherever you may be in that process, if you are actively looking for roles and creating documents to apply for to opportunities, that's great. But recognizing that Tufts Career Services is here to meet you where you're at in your career journey. So should you be in a place where you're not sure what you're looking for, we can help with discovery and exploration. If you are trying to understand what you are looking for, we can help you develop specific targeted job and internship search strategies that are relevant to the roles you're looking for. And we can help you build the marketing documents like we're talking about today. We can talk about networking, relationship management, and interview and negotiation, or any other career related topics. So just this today we'll be covering marketing tool development. So how do you create the documents and where do you place them so they're most likely to get noticed and read? I would say for a lot of us, the feeling of creating a resume might evoke an emotion like this. I think it is important to understand that from a career center standpoint, we do not expect you to be experts in resume and CV and cover letter writing. We want you to be experts in what you do, and that we have templates and resources and tools and ideas of what those best practices might be. So just being mindful that this is not a process that I think you have to or should do all by yourself. One of the most ubiquitous and well-known resume development books is one called Knock 'em Dead career books. And this is a quote by its author. And I think to a certain degree, this is very much true. It is your portable document that showcases your brand and your value and your interest in a particular role. The caveat to this is I think technology is evolving a little bit, and that LinkedIn might leak its way into this conversation. But as far as how we develop jobs outside of networking and connections where you don't have to submit a document, I think your resume and CV is absolutely critical. So that is how long you have between when somebody picks up your document and reads it and decides whether or not they want to keep reading it and put it in the no pile or the maybe pile. It's about 6 seconds. We think that's a huge opportunity, because if you understand how these documents are constructed and how the audience reads them, you can prepare it in a way to get 6 seconds and another 6 seconds and another 6 seconds, so your document becomes readable. So we think some of the best resume
Angela, is Matt frozen or is the whole system frozen?
I think just Matt is frozen. I'm writing to him. Let's give it another second.
Okay.
Up. I think Matt has left and he will rejoin us. So just hang in there, guys. Technical difficulties.
My sincere apologies, everyone. Seems that I've lost a connection. So let me reestablish this. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. So as mentioned, there are 4 elements of a resume: formatting, which is how a document looks; content, which is what you did; messaging is how you did it; and flow is where information goes in the page that makes the most sense. This is an advertisement. It's an advertisement that I saw, or part of it that I saw on the Orange Line a few years ago while I was standing between stops. And between those 4 stops, I stared at these 3 dogs and these 3 pyramids and tried to make sense out of what I was looking at. It turns out that this is an advertisement for vitamin water. And what I think was interesting about this exercise is you don't have 4 stops with your document. But the other thing about this, it is usually not the document's fault that it didn't work, or the advertisement. It's usually not the graphic designer's issue in when creating this document. Usually the challenge is way back at the beginning, when the marketing directors and advertisers were trying to figure out who's the audience, what are they trying to build, who's it for, who are they trying to sell to, what type of decisions do they want the readers or the people who are looking at, what they want to think and behave like. It's very much the same thing, I think, with a resume. Is your resume is most definitely an advertisement to draw people's attention, and recognizing that, creating something that makes sense. And a lot of that is based on the fact that understanding that your document must be targeted to the opportunities that you're directly seeking. One resume to fit all opportunities is less likely to be discovered and pursued these days than in the past. One of those reasons is because it is so easy to be able to apply for any particular job, a lot of times through online opportunities. So you could have tens or thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that are applying to different opportunities at any given time. So when they're trying to filter these documents with the right information in the right places, making sure that your document is directly tailored to that particular role is absolutely critical. Otherwise, it is likely to get passed by. So I think the best resumes are relevant, is that when you're applying for roles, is looking at the actual position description and using not only the consistent vocabulary that is within that position description, but also recognizing there might be vocabulary within the industry that might be relevant within that role. So if you are applying for a job in healthcare, for instance, there are certain terminologies and certain aspects can be helpful. It may be inpatient or outpatient or ICD-9s or DRGs or standards of care. So the career services, we're here, to be able to not only help you sort of shape these documents, but also to be able to think about how that document's tailored so the audience reads it as if you have or do or will have the expertise in those areas. Those documents are also are keyword searchable. Again, I'll mention the fact that the words that are in the position description, particularly ones when you're applying for jobs online through an applicant tracking system, they're looking for specific words within that document to move you on to the next phase of being able to likely get an interview with that organization. So making sure, and I'll show you an example a little bit of how to go do that, but making sure that it's not just a generic document. And I just mentioned, resumes with relevant keywords are more likely to get found by recruiters and hiring managers, very much for that reason for technology. One of the things that we think can be very valuable about building a resume is that resumes can be titled. So, what we're looking at is imagine yourself being at the library and seeing a stack of books, and they all look the same and none of them have a title. Which one are you more likely to pull off a shelf if you're looking for information? Most likely the one that has a cover on top of it. I think it's very similar with a resume. The idea is that not only having dynamic content on your resume or having contact information, but telling the audience what you are applying for. Now, that may seem slightly counterintuitive, but here's the thing. If you have 6 to 10 seconds with a document, and let's say your document is a page or 2, without a title, and if there's no formal connection with you or that opportunity, what you're forcing the audience to do is draw a conclusion about your background. We think is helpful is that you can draw the conclusion for the audience and they'll read the document within that particular framework. So if you're applying for, in this case, a physician assistant or a marketing director or an SEO specialist or any number of opportunities, oftentimes it is the specific role within the specific internship or job description. And I think it's helpful. I think it's actually a conservative number, is that, we estimate about more than 80% of the resumes and CVs don't have a title. So it's one strategy to help our audiences get their documents read faster. Best resumes are accurate. Because it is so easy to apply for opportunities and the volume of roles that organizations are getting, hiring managers and recruiters are very, very, very likely to dismiss a quality candidate based on having a document that has typos or mistakes within that framework. So when I was mentioning building these documents independently is not always the ideal role. I think making sure before you submit a document that represents you to an organization is having friends or colleagues or professors or administrators or the career center be able to take a look at that document and may have a different set of eyes on what you've done and may be able to see things, any errors within that document, so you aren't dismissed on technical aspects without being evaluated by the quality of your candidacy. I think also best resumes are accessible. Is that, it's one thing to be able to submit an opportunity, but you have the ability to upload your resume to large job boards like Indeed, for instance. And we know that can be helpful because hiring managers and recruiters, maybe they're looking for particular candidates and they're trying to find the right person, will look at some of the larger job boards and see if there are people that might be worth targeting to. Definitely having your resume in Handshake. So having employers that have volunteered to be part of our employer engagement program or platform to be able to access your background. Having working with placement agencies and temporary staffing agencies whose sole job is to work for companies to find talent for their particular jobs. So the Robert Half would be an example, but there's several organizations. This happens to be a temporary staffing agency and a placement agency, but even recruiters. I think also being able to put on targeted job boards, or if you are able to place your resume within a professional association. So recruiters and hiring managers, again, be able to search your resume through the American Market Association or the American Philosophy Association. So this is just a reminder that making sure when you are targeting opportunities that people can find you in the places that they're looking. So as I mentioned before, resume being a marketing and branding document to showcase your skills, experience, and potential. And I think these 4 elements are critical. So I mentioned format, content, messaging, and flow. So you have a package of a document. So this is an example of a study done by a recruiting firm. And what they had done is they gave, I believe, 400 hiring managers and recruiters a series of resumes, and this is one of them. And what they did is they put eye tracking glasses on their faces and had them look at these documents over a period of time. And what they did is this is a heat map of where the audience's eyeballs go when they were looking at a traditional document. And on the list, on the left, or the right rather, is a list of the things that they're looking for: name, current company, and current title, and the times you've been there, previous positions, and education. But here's the thing, and I think I mentioned this before, when it comes to formatting, is that structuring a document not in the way they expect to be read, but the way you want to read it. So being able to think about not only where information is and having titles, but being able to bold strategic text in certain places, or the fact that your resume doesn't have to be exclusively chronological. Is that what we're finding more valuable now, is having a somewhat of a chronological, which is by reverse chronological by date, and then by function, so what you've done. So there may be things that you've done that are more critical that you may have not done most recently. So being able to recognize is that you can reshape where information goes, so you can decide how you want the audience to access information. But in the absence of it, this is the behavior that they'll have. This is just an example of a resume. There's no one perfect resume document, no one perfect resume format with content. There's huge variety. It's subjective. It's dependent on the types of roles you're looking for. It's dependent on the expectations of the hiring managers within those industries. But I think having some best practices to discuss are helpful. I think I mentioned before, contact information, I'll start with contact information at the top. Depending on what you're looking for, if you've earned credentials that are relevant to your role, I think being able to add that to your document can be helpful. So if you've earned an MA or an MS or a PhD, and it's particularly relevant to the role you're looking for, being able to add that to your contact information. One of the things that we hope people are considering is maybe not putting your home address on your document. The reason is that if I have your address, I can go to Google Earth and I can look at your front door. And that could unnecessarily bias a candidate's candidacy based on information that's immaterial to their background. If you are staying local to an area, let's say to Boston, even if you don't live in Boston proper, putting Boston, Mass should be enough. If you're looking in a region outside of where you currently live, it's becoming more relevant or more common practice to not put your location on at all. There are caveats and exceptions to all of these things, but it's just a way of thinking about some of the best practices that are available there. The other thing is making sure while you're a current student at Tufts, a Tufts email address I think would be appropriate. But when you graduate, I would strongly consider either a personal vanity URL or a Gmail address. The reason is that if you have a AOL address, you're my parents. If you have a Yahoo address, you're me. And if and if you have something else, you're more current. Something like Gmail takes out any age bias from your document. Another thing to be able to consider is putting a customized URL of your LinkedIn profile, which is something you can do from your profile page in about 10 seconds, usually customized to your name. Now, there's two reasons to do this. One is that, and having been an executive recruiter and worked with them historically, is that if we like your resume or your CV, we'll probably read your cover letter. And if we still like you, we're going to go to your LinkedIn profile. And if we still like you, we're going to Google you and we'll do it in 5 minutes. So if you understand that that's what hiring behavior looks like, making it easy for the audience to access your information can be helpful. And the other thing with LinkedIn is that when we do Google searches for you and thinking about building a brand online and being accessible, is that hiring managers and recruiters, we hope that if we search for your name in particular, that we will find a positive link about you in the first 3 pages of a Google search or a search engine search. But ideally, we would want to see a positive link about you on the first page of a search by your name. Because LinkedIn is so heavily integrated with search engines, the more you use it, the more you engage, the more you connect with other people, comment on things or post information, the more your profile will be run through the search engines and pop you to the top of those search results. So I know this is a lot of information about contact before we even get to the details, but these are simplified practices that will help people navigate not only your document, but also you and your brand externally. I mentioned job title. That is not, you do not always have to do this. I imagine there are plenty of exceptions where that is unnecessary, and this is where working with career services can be a valuable addition. But I will say the first quarter to a third of your resume is absolutely critical for your document. Is that because, and we're seeing this more and more, and many of you on this call today have this similar experience, is that you're not just your work experience and your degree. Many of you have experiential projects. Many of you have volunteer experience. Many of you have leadership experience. Many of you have community engagement experience. Many of you have specific technical skills that are useful for particular roles. That first quarter to a third of the page is a great section. We think is sort of an executive summary of you. The idea is that being able to synthesize a little bit about your background and your expertise at the beginning of your document, and the rest of the information validates your candidacy. There's no standard way to do it. I will show a couple of examples, but I think it's usually some combination of a list of competencies. And by competencies, I mean things you can do, like market research, quantitative analysis, business planning, teaching and instruction. You could also have an inventory of skills, and it's semantics, but I think skills are the tools you use to accomplish the competencies. So if you know how to use SPSS or SQL or Photoshop or Illustrator or et cetera, that are relevant to those pieces, this may be a place, an area that might be valuable to do that. You might also consider either a few sentences or a few bullets about your candidacy. These are things we can certainly help draft to give a little bit more information, rather than having to go through all your dates and all your background and resolve your expertise. When you get to your experience, one of the things I think can be helpful if for those of you at work or internship or experiential learning experience is that there are many of us have worked for brands that people recognize. You know, if you've worked for Google or Nike or Goldman Sachs or something that may be readily available, you might have a pretty good understanding of what that organization does. But one of the things that I think can be helpful is that when you're listing professional experience, one is having the title of the organization that you work for, um, and then having your job title. In this particular case, between the job title uh, and your the organization you work for is a one sentence description of the organization. This can be helpful because most of us have worked or will work for organizations that other people don't know about. So what you're doing is if you're letting somebody know, here's who I worked for, here's what my title was, here is the context in which I worked for, this is the nature of this job. So for instance, if you worked for Tufts, one example might be an 11,000 student private non-sectarian R1 research university in Medford, Mass. Now, people may know who Tufts is, but they might not know how big it is, the context, what it looks like, where it is, that it's a huge R1 research institution. It's giving somebody scope. Now, the size of the organization, I think, is irrelevant. You may have worked for a small firm or a startup firm with, you can, listing an organization, a boutique consulting firm focused on X, Y, and Z. But when this helps when somebody's getting into what you did, they know what was it about that organization that they can connect your work to. We've seen is making sure from getting into specific details around, bullets and information, is that I think it's certainly important to isolate the work that you did. In this case, it's bulleted, but you'd be able to think about, you might be able to put one or two sentences before your bullets about your nature of the responsibilities of your work. So being able to say, this is what I'm currently responsible for or have historically been responsible for. And adding bullets to your resume are outcome driven. So they are things that you've done that you find that are relevant to the roles you're looking for, or you feel are strong accomplishments that can be measured. So this is where details and context can be helpful. Stating a fact that you worked on a report and delivered to somebody can be helpful, but be able to who you've done a report for, why that report was important, what were the outcomes of that information, and what did they do with it. This presentation today is not about writing specific targeted bullets, but recognizing the fact that when you look at an opportunity or you're looking at a job profile or you're thinking about somebody who's never met you or understands what you've done before, this is a way to walk them through your background so they have an idea of the breadth of what you've done for those particular places. Now, it's not in here, and I think this is critical too, is that people often are asking me, should my resume be one page? For a long time, the benchmark for hiring managers and recruiters has been one page for every 10 years of experience. But that benchmark, I don't think is relevant as it used to be. And the reason, as I mentioned before, is that we're requiring students and professionals to do such a variety of things to showcase their brand. So if you've done academic projects, which many of you on this call have done, featuring them within your document may be incredibly important. If you've spent 12 to 16 weeks on a team-based project, working with clients, for instance, and building a project that you've delivered results to somebody else, that can be incredibly marketing. It's unusual professionally to have that much time to concentrate on a certain type of problem, problem to solve. So recognizing is that, the work that you're doing within the classroom and articulating the specific elements of that, I think can be important, but also takes up space. But also, again, volunteer experience, outside of work experience, leadership within your community or leadership within the institution. So what that ends up happening is, because if your document is relevant, it might be longer than just a page. And this is something I learned from senior in high school. I had a history instructor, and we were asking her, how long should our papers be for the work that we were doing? And she would also always say sufficiently long enough to cover the topic. And I think that's a pretty good gauge to do those things. Now, I think 2 pages is maximum for most resumes. There are caveats to that, particularly those of you clinically or looking at academic positions. But I think those are decent guideposts. Another one is should I put my GPA on my resume? The standard is typically, if your GPA is 3.5 or above, we usually say, yes, you can put that on your document. If it's under that, I would potentially consult with the career services department or people in your space to see if that works. People have asked, should I put my graduate degree GPA on there, or put my undergraduate GPA if I've gotten into graduate school? Again, I think that can depend. The very nature of getting into graduate school means that somebody believed that your credentials were were valuable. So I think these are all conditional, but things we can certainly talk about if that was helpful to any of them. So that's a pretty big overview of some possible best practices. The Career Development Center has a portfolio of resume templates and CV templates by industries and sectors that we can all share. So recognizing the fact that you don't necessarily have to start from scratch, or ideally not have to start from scratch when building a document like this. There's a tool that I think is incredibly valuable for people developing resumes, and it's called JobScan, or resumes and CVs. So because so many of our applications to jobs are through technologies, when you're submitting an application to a company, it's usually going through an applicant tracking system. That is a technology that's filtering your resume based on a job description to see whether or not you're an optimal candidate for that role. JobScan is a predominantly free technology that allows you to copy and paste the content of your resume, copy and paste the content of your position description, so the job or the internship you're applying for, and it runs a comparative analysis to make sure that your document is capturing the right keywords, information, and is appropriately targeted to that role. It's the exact same technologies that companies are using, which I think is incredibly helpful. So what it'll do, it'll give you a feature, it'll score your document based on how well your document matches that opportunity, and will give you a list of feedback around how they think you might well improve that document. I do not think benchmarking your resume to their score is the most important thing. I think the most important thing is to look at the feedback with underneath that to make sure the best practices are being captured. One of the things they do is see how often the things that you mention in your resume and CV are consistent with what they're looking for. So the idea is that, and this happens quite often, is that they may be asking for a particular skills, and they may be asking for it multiple times. You may be saying it in your document, but missing the words or the vocabulary within that piece. This is just one reflection, is that, under mobile, like this job may be looking for management experience or mobile commerce experience. It may have asked for it a few times, but it's not mentioned in your resume. So it's saying that we're asking for this thing. It's something to consider whether or not you should be putting this information in there. So this is just, people are a huge part of the process of building your documents, but recognizing there are tools and resources that can be helpful as well. Another tool that's available now is something called VMock. Again, most of this resource is free with some of the feedback, but what it does, it is a resume evaluation tool that uses machine learning and AI to look at your resume against most resumes and give you quantitative feedback by category about what may be best for you within that document. Again, I think the scores that they're listing are subjective, but this particular tool can be helpful in giving actual feedback on the types of bullets and roles you might be looking for. With both of the tools I showed you, most of the functionality is free. Even the premium versions of both of those things can be very, very helpful. For instance, this is a little outside of resume and cover letter development, but with JobScan just launched a job comparison feature, which if you upload your resume, it will give you recommendations on the types of roles that you might best fit. So as you're thinking about what you're applying to, it may be saying, based on what your document looks like and what we know about what the industries look like and what the market looks like, that you might also be a fit for these types of roles, which may open some opportunities for ways of thinking. One of the things that's changing a little bit, people ask about, should I have a visual resume? And as you'll see here, here's just 3 examples of, I would say, less typical formatted documents where information is presented in a different way, a different aesthetic for the audience to read. I'm an advocate for optimizing the visualization of information on your documents. And I think there are ways to showcase information, not only that it exists, but actual measure it. For instance, in this previous one, being able to showcase, how strongly you believe your skills are in this specific area. There are industries that appreciate visual resumes. We've certainly seen it in marketing and advertisement roles where these can be helpful. I think it is helpful to understand is that a visual resume has not been embraced as a contemporary tool universally. Really understanding who your audience is and what they're looking for is incredible. Absolutely having a static document of just, that's more traditional with just words and white space. And the fact that there's no standard for visual resumes in the marketplace right now. So there are organizations that are trying to learn how to credential these things. So if you are thinking about a document like this, I highly recommend having a traditional one, and then certainly talking with peers or organizations or the Career Services Center about what the possibilities are to craft a document something like this. So just a quick primer on resumes. They're interesting, they have a title, they're accurate, they're accessible, and they're relevant. The customization is huge, and again, not having to do this all by yourself. So where your resume is a snapshot in time of your expertise that's relevant to your role, your cover letter is something else. And I think this captures a lot of sentiments when it comes to developing a cover letter. And there's a reason, I think, why cover letters are difficult to write. They're a document designed to articulate why this job and why right now. And they are designed to articulate, why are you valuable, why are you interesting, and why should we hire you? The thing that's really, really difficult is being objective about our own skill sets, our own capabilities, and our own brand. And having spent the last 10 plus years, in dedicated career-related roles, for the roles outside of direct career services that I've done, the last 3 roles that I've had is that I've personally hired professional resume writers to help write my resumes and cover letters. Not because I don't understand how they're built, but it's very, very difficult. I found it very, very difficult to extract myself from my own messaging to create something that somebody else would be looking for. So being thoughtful of the fact that, again, not having to reinvent the wheel every time you do it. I think good, great cover letters are ones that are targeted to the audiences that they're looking for. And again, they're not biographies. They're specific, very, very specific to the role that you're looking for. And they showcase your value and your unique experience that's directly related to that role with the vocabulary of that position that's related to those opportunities. And like I said, certainly ask for help if you need to develop those things. We have a portfolio, of cover letter examples and frameworks of which to structure those pieces. Because what we don't want to do with cover letters is we don't think you should have to reinvent the wheel. Every single cover letter that you write to an audience has to be specifically targeted and written for that role. It's absolutely critical. Again, because so many people can apply for so many different jobs, really making a practical and a skill-based and emotional connection to a job for a hiring manager can be really, really critical. And not having it be generic and open-ended. Can you get a job with a general resume and a general cover letter that's focused on specific areas? Sure, I think it's possible, but I think it's harder. So again, these would sort of best practices. I think the more focused you are, the more you do your work in the front end of knowing exactly what you want, it's easier to craft and write the things that you need to write that are going to be most thoughtful and read by the audience that you're looking for. I think the last piece is making sure they're proofread. Again, I think not only for typographical errors, but also for content and to be able to make sense. But again, there's no singular format for a cover letter. Cover letters can be in the narrative. Cover letters can be bulleted. Cover letters can be 2 paragraphs or 3 paragraphs. They do not have to necessarily be kept to 1 page. People always ask, how do I start my cover letter? For a lot of you, to get into graduate school, or if you've got some clinical degrees, to build statements of purpose, those are oftentimes great catalysts for cover letters. So the very nature of applying for the university and writing your essays to get in, oftentimes is a level of reflection that you may not have done before, but is useful when you're applying for particular opportunities. This is just a nice photo or an image and a structure of a way to sort of think about how you match to an opportunity. So being able to look at a position description and being able to deconstruct it, be able to break it down into its pieces and see where your opportunities match. And I think the 3 ovals on the right make a lot of sense, is having a document to introduce yourself. But I think that's so what factor. Why are you interesting and why are you valuable is absolutely critical. And then being able to close that document without asking for a conversation. So here's some sort of key overviews for best practices to create these documents. In just a moment, I'll show a couple examples of some pieces of some resumes and cover letters and how they can be structured just from a visual standpoint, maybe for some content. But really being thoughtful about you and really breaking down your background first before you even start thinking about writing these documents, I think is critical. Having a focused target on the roles you're looking for. I think being very thoughtful about looking at what others who are applying for similar jobs are doing. A lot of times people are featuring their resumes within their LinkedIn profiles, being able to look at those and how they've structured their documents. This bullet, being patient, I think is really critical. I think these documents and be able to create them are skills. And I think from a career services standpoint, we spend a lot of time developing these competencies. Again, not expecting to be experts in doing these things, but the idea is that writing them can be iterative. It can take a little bit of time to craft that right document, and giving yourself enough space to do those pieces. And there might be iterations and drafts that make the most sense. So recognizing that there is frustration that can come with building these things, but you don't have to do it by yourself. And I think that alludes to the last point, is that before you submit any document professionally to anybody for the roles you're looking for, I am still a huge advocate for having people read your documents ahead of time. Some are going to read for punctuation and grammar, some are going to read for content, some are going to read for structure. I think having multiple eyes on things to make sure you have the best structured document that you can have, that goes out the door, that represents you in the best possible way. We do have a Tufts Graduate Career Services Guide. We have one for undergraduates as well that has a lot of examples of resumes and CVs and cover letters, as well as how to break down and orchestrate these things. Plus, the Career Services website has a variety of tools and resources and templates to help you through this process. So before I get into a few examples to show just we are and will one day return to Dowling. So we are in 400 Boston Ave. Career Services Center is open regular business hours throughout the summer, and we continue to be a dedicated resource for all students, for job search strategy, for networking, building relationships, and one-on-one conversations.
Thanks, Matt. We have a couple of questions in the chat. I don't know if you wanted to address those now or if you want to wait. Okay,
yeah,
sure. So just to reiterate that we will be sharing this recording. So we got a couple of questions about that. We had a question a little while ago about the skills that are listed on your resume. And the question was sort of like, I think, if I'm reading in this correctly, and you, Fan, if you want to chime in again, I can unmute you. But listing the most skillful skills is how they put it. So how do you kind of, I think, extract, is this specific to the position, or how are you suggesting listing skills?
Sure. So here's, we can see my screen. Here's a sort of talking about a variety of formats. In this particular case, competencies are more at the top. It gets into breakdown. But you were mentioning skills. Here's one way skills can be articulated. So, and I like the idea of segmenting skills by areas of expertise. So in this particular case, it was breaking down by, this was programming languages or scientific applications or software tools, which are, I imagine most of them are directly related to the roles and responsibilities. Now, many professionals may be bring another one up. So this is just one of, like, if those of you are thinking, clinically or clinical CV, with the idea is that, how do you capture a portfolio of skills, clinically? So making sure that you're having a list of roles and responsibilities of what you can actually do within the lab. So you can list them out. You can segment them up by opportunity. Another example might be bring this up. For computer science, best practices might be articulated very, very specifically. So in each of these cases, your skills, technical skills, background skills, focus skills, are placed in different areas. But but in whatever way that is, you're putting it in a place where people can read it and understand it. You can actually use the resources that are available for the jobs that you're doing. Which I hope answers the question.
Yes, I think so. Thank you, Matt. So another question is, does it look bad to put just your graduate GPA and not your undergraduate?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. I don't think it will be.
And the next question is accessing the Career Center portfolio of resumes and templates online. Can you let us know how students can access that, or if it's it readily available on the website, or is it a file that we can share afterwards?
Yeah. So after this presentation, I'll share with Angela this presentation and a portfolio of resume and cover letter templates that I have. So just be able to share it as a whole document, so in some pieces. And then the graduate career guide is on, and undergraduate too, is also on the Tufts career page. The examples that I'm sharing aren't currently in a document on the Career Center, so I'm just sending you from my own hard drive.
Okay, thank you. And how old is too old to keep something on your resume, like a past volunteer experience, for example?
One of the benchmarks from hiring managers and recruiters has been anything older than 15 years. I think that's a very loose guideline. I think it's about relevancy and, if it's relevant and appropriate, finding a place for it. But there's also ways for historical experience you have that goes back farther than let's say 15 years. You can all, in your resumes have, 5 additional years of experience in financial services and education for X, Y, and Z companies. So there are ways to, you don't necessarily lose the specific you can provide an overview of your expertise and experience without having to break it down as its own individual component. And again, there will be times when maybe even things that are more recent that are not necessarily the most relevant don't find their ways into the document. So just being cognizant of the fact that it's a lot of times, it doesn't have to be completely and exclusively and overwhelmingly chronological and biographical for it to be useful.
Thank you. Lisa has a question about mentioning coursework on resumes. Lisa, want to ask your question?
Yes, please. So thank you, by the way, for having this. This has been so helpful. So my question is, I graduated Tufts last year, and so I feel like right now in my resume, coursework is like one of the first things in the first 1/3 of my resume. And I feel like I'm applying to jobs in other countries, so they don't even know what these courses really have. So do you have any advice for how we can mention the courses we've taken in a good way?
Sure. This is one example. Does everyone see the software and data systems engineer position?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes.
So, again, this is just an idea, way of thinking. So what's really interesting is I sort of mentioned listing competencies at the top of your document as a way to showcase your relevant skills and aptitude for a role very, very quickly. It sort of tells the audience right away that you know what they're looking for in this role. So in this particular document, it's sort of highlighting those pieces. And then a little bit farther down in the degree section is having this is additional coursework. Now, what I think is really interesting is a lot of times the coursework that we do directly either is titled a competency or has elements of their competencies. So a lot of times we're finding is that coursework. So if you've taken quantitative methods, that may very well be a course you took, but that's also a competency that the role might be looking for. So I think you end up looking at each of those individual positions, the classes you took that might be relevant. And I wouldn't necessarily be an exhaustive list, adding classes that you think might be helpful. And in this particular case, academic coursework has its own section. We put it underneath education, but you could even list relevant courses as a bullet underneath the education piece if you think it's the topic is helpful, but it's not necessarily directly related to the role.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you.
Matt, we have 2 questions that are related to page length. So one is there a standard format for page numbers 1 and 2 for 2-page resumes? And if the resume is 1.5 pages and there's empty space on the second page, is this okay, or should they try to fill it in for the full 2 pages?
I think to answer the first question, I think if it's making sure if you have a second page for your resume, is that you label as such. In this particular this particular document, at the top is name and page 2. I would probably edit on the fly, having something page 2 of 2, so it lets the audience know that there's more to this document in case they get separated. You may even want to put phone number and email address on that second page as well. You can do it in a footer or a header, or do it something like this that can be helpful. I don't think that having empty space on a second page is debilitating to the document. Again, I think if it's relevant, put in there aesthetically. And if there's a concern about filling in pages, this is where there's a lot of flexibility when it comes to formatting. So, there are ways to make sure the information on the page can look aesthetically appropriate. And if we're worried about too much white space, I do not personally think it is impactful to the candidacy. If it's relevant on the next page, that's fine.
Great, thank you. Birgit, we have a question from you. I don't know if you wanted to ask it or not. And this might be a little bit longer than we have time for, but Matt, if you could touch upon sort of aligning, I think, resumes to their LinkedIn profiles, I think that's her question.
That's a great question. So your resume is a document. It's a moment in time of your experience, and it's targeted to a particular role, where your LinkedIn profile is not your resume. There's content of your resume typically within that document, but there's a lot more flexibility. You can create a lot more thoughtful, broad, contextualized profile for the audience. So for instance, things that like have to haves for a LinkedIn profile, like the fact that you have a photograph in your profile, which in Europe is very, very common. In the US, we don't typically put photographs on our resumes and CVs. But you have to have it in your LinkedIn profile because you're 18 times more likely to get a view because of it. Having a tagline on your LinkedIn profile, which wouldn't necessarily have on your resume, is absolutely critical. Having a summary on your LinkedIn profile is a have to have, and usually that it can be done in the third person, but typically the first person is what audiences are looking for. Within your experience section, you can, if you decide to be more narrative in your roles and responsibilities. So LinkedIn gives you a little bit more flexibility to sort of showcase how and what you did without the more specific spatial limitations. And there's a section for coursework. There's a section for skills, which, making sure that you populate that is that, you can add 50 skills to your skills section. And then, so that could be helpful. Adding a list of keywords in your summary can be very, very helpful for audiences. So after you write your summary, having a list of the skills and competencies, just separated by downward slashes or commas, that helps the hiring managers and recruiters sift through the 700 million people that are on LinkedIn to find your particular option. So
Okay.
the idea is that you can craft a more personalized message through LinkedIn. You can't necessarily do through a resume or a CV.
And to piggyback on that, I think this is a good question about students that are in their current job search mode, I guess, if they're seeking employment and not yet licensed, how they reference that in LinkedIn.
So they haven't earned their degree yet, or they haven't earned a series of credentials
They're
yet?
seeking employment and or not yet licensed, and they're job hunting. So is it just their last position, and then it just is blank, so that it's clear that they're job searching, or if there's another kind of like filler to let employers know that they're doing something, but they're actually actively looking for a job?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would put whatever your most recent position was that you actually worked at. We're having these conversations in the Career Center pretty often. It's possible that some or many of you had a full-time opportunity or a part-time or an internship opportunity that was either postponed or eliminated. Right now, the best practices from external sources is not to add those pieces. There may be possibilities in adding information within your LinkedIn, your cover letter, to sort of give a little bit of background about those expertise. But right now, it's currently what you have done. This is where the value of networking and career planning becomes really, really helpful. And because technology is a great way to source a job, and we're huge advocates for it, but you're 10 times more likely to get a job through a relationship. So being very thoughtful about what you're looking for, who you want to connect with, and being able to share that context of that story that you're currently in can be helpful. If these best practices change, and I expect they will, we're try to be as diligent and as swift as possible about communicating that through the Graduate School of Arts and Sciences, on the career page, through the graduate student newsletter, to make sure anything that we're hearing that's evolving, that we're getting we're making sure that you as students and alumni have the best the best current information that we have.
Could I just also clarify, because I was a question that you were recently talking about. My name's Hannah. So I'm graduated from the OT department, but I am not able to take my licensing exam. But like, you start the job search, but you can start it before you take your licensing exam. Is it ethical to like label myself occupational therapist on any of these job search things like LinkedIn, even though I'm not licensed, but I can still apply at this point?
Yeah, we can talk, certainly get into the specifics depending on the nature of the credentials. So the idea is that, if you graduate from law school and get a JD, you have your JD. If you have to pass the bar to practice. So I think there's similar pieces to that. I think it's true for any clinical roles are a great example. So if you finish OT or PA school, you still have to pass your boards to practice medicine, but you earn the credentials for the institution. So I think that's relevant. But even saying, if you know when you're going to, if there's field work you have to do, or if you know when you're taking your exam, that's something you can put in your document. Sitting for OT licensure exam, August 2020. So there are definitely ways to put that information in. So so you recognize the degree, but in order to practice your profession, you have to be credentialed by an external body, and that you can tell them that this is when that's going to happen.
Matt, just to add to that too, a kind of similar question about including a confirmed job position on the resume, which you'll be getting in the future. I guess it's in anticipation, so that probably applies to the resume as well as LinkedIn. If that makes sense. Yeah, Priya, if this is a question from Priya, if you want to add to your question.
So the question is, if you're same thing, if you're getting a job or you will be employed, is it putting it on, or is it?
I think so, including a confirmed job position, just that you probably haven't started yet, but you've been offered the job.
Fine. And you could put your, and if you're worried about it, is that expected start, you can put in the overview of the job in LinkedIn, expected start date September 1st, 2020, for instance. So I think what's really interesting about career planning, I think there's an honesty to it. Another example is that for a lot of professionals, and this is going to become more prevalent, is that there are people going to be taking time off intentionally or unintentionally for whatever reason. One of the things that's becoming very, very common is professionals that are leaving the workforce to care for aging family members, or caring for just family members in general. So the idea is, in your summary, you can highlight your background, but let's say you took time off. It is completely reasonable to say things like, took a professional leave of absence to care for an ailing family member in 2019 and 20. So by telling somebody that story, there's nowhere to go. There's no other question to ask. It fills in the gap. It has the pieces. They can't ask you about the details of your personal leave. Now, I know this may seem in conflict with saying I'm unable to secure a position because of the marketplace, or I had a position and it went away. I think right now there's no precedent for that yet. So I think even though it might seem similar, it's not yet.
Great, thank you. We're a few minutes over time. If anyone has any last minute questions, we can try to answer them. Matt, there was a question just asking for you to reiterate how folks get in touch with you for one-on-one sessions.
Absolutely. The best way is to connect through Handshake. So I'll be certainly adding more time, but Handshake, setting up one appointments for grad. I work at the moment work exclusively with graduate students. There are caveats to that, but let's just say for graduate students. So what I usually ask is use Handshake first. And because you've been part of this presentation, if you don't find some availability on Handshake initially, and you want to have a conversation, to send me a week's worth of availability, and I'll do my best to accommodate my schedule. And the way to do that is my email address is matthew.casey@tufts.edu.
Thank you. If there aren't any more questions, Matt, if you wanted to just wrap it up, I can be sure to save the chat to make sure we've answered all the questions. And then everyone who is registered for this webinar, be sure to share the link once we get this video added to YouTube.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. This is for some it's working out well. Some for that it's a very challenging time. You know, writing these documents and creating them is an art and a skill, and we want to be advisors and advocates and support for building these things. So you create the documents that best reflect you and help you become the ideal candidate for the roles that you're looking for. We certainly couldn't cover every element of all these pieces. Certainly we'll be sending out all the templates and tools and resources, and very much hope that have the ability to speak with all of you at some point, and if should that be a value to your career. But I'm grateful for the time. I'm grateful for the access, and I hope you all have swift and successful document creation and career plans moving forward. So thank you very much.